Going into this year's Nationals in the Carling Charlotte, I wanted to make a Rhinar deck that would have a favorable matchup against slower decks such as Oldhim, Dromai, and Iyslander, and keep a reasonable matchup versus Fi. My plan to accomplish this was to try and average as close to 4 points of damage per card as possible. Against more controlling decks, the list is looking to use 3 to 5 cards to come in for 12 to 20 damage, and against more aggressive decks, the list is looking to do 4 to 12 damage off of 1 to 3 cards. And in order to close out games, the plan is to leak through damage with Intimidates, with that life lead we hopefully establish throughout the game. So that said, let's move on to the list and how we executed this plan. For equipment, the deck runs Crown of Providence as a tool to fix hands and to protect our win conditions against decks that threaten discard effects. To give an example, blocking a Crippling Crush with it to prevent a Blood Rush Billow from being discarded can decide an entire game, and the list might be one of the better ones at leveraging Gambler's Gloves and Scabskin Leathers to help secure games against aggressive decks like Fi. This is because it lets us start pushing our damage up to 5 damage per card instead of 4 damage per card when we have access to those additional action points. Spring Tunic is used in the deck and is so impactful that it actually dictates what we end up arsenaling based on how many energy counters it has. An example would be in some matchups when you're at 0 counters to 2, you'll most likely be trying to get defense reactions into your arsenal, but as we near 3 counters, we really want to start moving into getting 2-cost attacks into our arsenal as our priority. Skullhorn comes in against Wizard along with Norrune Gloves, and against Runeblades we only bring in the Norrune Gloves. I run the deck as a stock 60, and I actually have that stock 60 set up as my 60 I run as Oldhim, and I just change up this 60 cards depending on the matchup with the sideboard cards you see here across the bottom. And as far as the basic outline of the deck, we run 30 6 or more power attacks in most configurations, and we run 18 blues, 18 yellows, and then 24 red cards as well. And the one thing to note is our yellow count will drop quite a bit lower than 18 when we go to play against aggressive decks, because we don't need the resources as much because it's very rare we're pitching with more than 1 card ever on a turn. Let's start with covering what is omitted from the deck. I don't run Beast Within because the life loss creates a level of variance that I just don't feel comfortable with, and the deck is built in a way that the banish/card draw effect isn't really required in order to do 3 attacks on a turn with Blood Rush Bellow running Mandible Claws. An additional reason is because Rhinar doesn't have a deep pool of high quality cards, and banishing things like Blood Rush Bellow, Barraging Beatdown, and Reckless Swing can leave you without enough ways to actually close out a game. Pack Call is another card we excluded, and that's just because blocking with a card can put your important pieces on the bottom of your deck, like a Blood Rush Bellow or a Reckless Swing, and that can cost you an entire game. Pummel is excluded because it competes for your Tunic resource too much with Blood Rush Bellow and Scabskin turns that are looking to push the value of a low card count turn with the use of the additional action points. And this will be covered later when we get more into the club side of the list. The deck runs 18 blues, and the reason for the inclusion of Blue Pack Hunt and Predatory Assault is to increase the chances of Blood Rush Bellows doing at least 16 points of damage when running Claws. With the way the deck is built, your Blood Rush Bellow turns are capable of doing 16 or more damage between 100 to 70% of the time, depending on the situation. And I'll have a video coming out later explaining this in greater detail, but understand that that is the reason for this odd inclusion. I only run the 2 Reckless Swings because these cards actually have a hard time getting out of the deck in your longer games and can become a liability the longer the game goes on. The yellow 6s that I run in the deck are mostly just used as resource cards and discard targets. With Dromai having a solid presence in the meta, I believe that Barraging Bighorn is now a must include as one of your filler yellow 6 attacks, since attacking a dragon guarantees a Gilligan on the card now, and if you ever fall behind on killing dragons, this can help catch you back up. For reds, we're running Alpha Rampage and Massacre because against decks that are looking to block out against us, this is a way for us to force through damage, and that can be very important, especially in the late game. Brandish is a tool that we use with Romping Club against decks that don't intend to block much. The role Brandish fills is quite powerful. It enables a hand to be able to block with 2 cards, and then with itself and a blue pitch card, be able to threaten 8 points of damage back to our opponent. While other options like Barraging Brawnhide also threaten 8 points of damage off just 2 cards, Brandish is impressively flexible with cards like Barraging Beatdown, Blood Rush Bellow, and even multiple copies of itself. An example of this would be a 3-card hand of just Brandish, Barraging Beatdown red, and then a blue pitch card. If your opponent doesn't block the Brandish, it's a pretty clear indication that they don't have any interest in blocking, and you can proceed to play the red Beatdown into a Club Swing and threaten just 12 points of damage off of 3 cards, unless they give you 2 of their remaining 3 cards, And this is extremely effective against aggro decks that need very specific hands in order to have strong turns and will normally go just completely unblocked. With Blood Rush Bellow, if you draw into it, it's a card that can be played out and just add additional damage to the turn that would otherwise be lost when running Club because of the lack of Go Again. The biggest change I believe you need to make when playing Club against aggressive decks is to view Blood Rush Bellows as a way to force through damage rather than relying on it for high damage turns. The best use cases for Blood Rush is to push through damage on an opening turn, and also using it as a way to force through lethal damage when you have a life lead to close out games. The card shouldn't be used to trade large sums of damage against aggressive decks. Taking 14 points of damage just to do 7 damage back to an opponent is a risk that we as Brute players need to move past. We have better options available that involve much lower risk. We arsenal a 2-cost attack, and then we wait until we have a Tunic on 3 counters. We can block down to just 1 card in hand. Hopefully it should be a blue pitch card. And on our turn, we roll for Scabskin Leathers. And if we get the 1 action point, we just swing the club and try again on the following turn. But if we do get the 2 action points, we now get to play out a 2-cost attack, say like Pack Hunt from Arsenal, and then with the remaining resources and then the Tunic, we can come in with the Club Swing. This is 10 damage off 2 cards, and let's say we get to Arsenal something like a Swing Big, this now becomes 12 damage off 2 cards. We didn't give up a ton of damage and take a giant risk to have this level of efficiency. We're just really raising the floor on how much damage we can do while minimizing the risk. If we really embrace this 2.7% chance that we have to lose the game every time we get to roll Scabskin Leathers, we can start to make some matchups that are 60-40 into 47-53 matchups almost instantly. These styles of play are also great when you don't have an arsenal, because if you get the 1 action point, you just arsenal the attack action and then just try again later. This pattern also creates turns against aggressive decks where you can just block with 3 cards, and on your turn, just arsenal that 2-cost attack like, say, Swing Big, and it enables these high-value turns later. This playstyle also allows us to exceed that 4 damage per card when we're attacking. And this helps us keep pace against these aggro decks while still being able to play a deck that's just full of 3 blocks. Gambler's Gloves are strictly there to protect us from 1s, and Tunic should never be used to block with as long as you still have your Gambler's Gloves up, because these 2 in combination allow for these really high efficiency turns that let you, exceed that 4 damage per card when attacking. The game plan I'm trying to execute with Claws is to maintain that 4 damage per card game plan, but we're looking to do that at a 3 to 5 card level. And the way we do this is at the 3 card level, we're not relying on Blood Rush Bellows to do this. We're actually just using that same Scabskin leverage that we talked about with Club, except for instead of using the weapon to make that second attack, we're actually just waiting on having a 2-cost attack in Arsenal and then an additional 2-cost attack in hand. An example of this would be we Arsenal a Command and Conquer, and then as our Tunic ticks up to 3, we draw into a hand that happens to have a blue and a Pack Hunt, and then 2 other cards we just block with for the turn, and then as it becomes our turn, we roll for Scabskin Leathers. With 1 action point, we'll either just play out the Command and Conquer or the Pack Hunt, depending on the situation, and if we happen to get that second action point, then we can come in with, like, say, the Pack Hunt and then the Command and Conquer, using that Tunic resource that we need for that 4th resource to pay for the turn. And this lets us come in for 12 damage off 3 cards, which is a phenomenal rate, and lets us keep pace with these really fast decks. And at the 5 card level, what we're looking to do is with Blood Rush Bellows, once again, you wanted that 2-cost attack in your arsenal, and this is where those odd blue Predatory Assaults and Pack Hunts come in, because those actually do get put in arsenal in this list, especially late game when you still have that 1 Blood Rush Bellow left, and you really need to have that 3rd attack. So these 2-cost attacks go into your arsenal, and then when you draw into your Blood Rush Bellow hand, ideally with a 5-card hand, you're not relying on drawing into your attacks on these Blood Rush Bellow turns. You're actually just looking to do it, draw into resources. So you pitch your blue, you play your Blood Rush Bellow, you discard 1 of your 2 6s in your hand, and then you're going to draw 2 additional cards. This leaves you with 3 cards in hand, a Tunic resource, and then 2 resources floating. So even if you drew into 3 reds that say don't do anything, you still can pay for the Claw Swing for 5, Claw Swing for 5, use your Tunic, with your last red in hand and then come in for that 6 attack, even if it's a command and conquer, right? So your floor there really should be 16 damage off of 5 cards. And then that should be your floor. And then your ceiling at this point should be, if you get, like, say, swing big into your arsenal, that's the turn you're really looking for to set up with this 5-card hand, is a swing big in arsenal. And then that then enables this to be a 20 damage turn off 5 cards. And you can block with one of the cards in your hand. Just understand that you're going to knock about 14 percentage points off of your chance of coming in for 16, because that's how much actually impacts the resources you draw into. So let's say you don't have a tunic on 3 counters and you have to block down, you're about 70% chance to draw into the resources you need to be able to come in for 16 points of damage. Once again, I'll have a video that explains the math on Blood Rush Bellow because it is way too much to cover in this video. Against Oldhim, the deck is looking to run the 60 stock cards and claws, and our game plan adapts to theirs slightly. If they're running a low elemental count and looking to push damage with light disruption, kind of like Tark's list from Canadian Nationals, most of the time we can just simply block out with any hand that we can't trade favorably with them. And fused Oakenholds aren't that scary since they don't actually make us discard cards, and we can't just lose win conditions like Blood Rush Bellow being discarded like against something like Crippling Crush. And because of this, I normally don't give up my armor to prevent the on hits unless I have some way of punishing that turn when it gets back to me. And these aggressive Oldhim decks are really lucky to average 3.5 damage per card offensively, and Scabskin Leathers and Tunic can allow us to have turns where we can do 12 or more damage off just 3 cards, and also play around the Ice React from Oldhim. And this 4 damage per card rate is something they can't really do past just 1 card, right? They can pitch a card for their hammer to come in for 4, but once you start figuring the Zealous and Rouse the Ancient plays, really they're looking to play more at that 3.5 and not the 4 points of damage per card rate. An example of this would be, let's say that we have a card in Arsenal, a Tunic on 3 counters, and then of our 4-card hand, we block with 2 cards and keep 2, with the 2 being a blue pitch card and then a 2-cost 6 attack. When it goes to our turn, we would simply roll for Scabskin Leathers, and if we get the second action point, would come in with that 6 power attack, pitching a blue pitch card, letting us float 1 resource, and then with our second action point we have left over, we would use the Tunic to go up the 2 resources here, and then come in with that second 6-cost attack. And then in this case here, we got to come in for a total of 12 damage off of just 3 cards, and this is a level of efficiency they can't match. And in this case, had we just gotten the 1 action point, we would have just simply played out a CNC from Arsenal and just re-arsenaled another attack action, and then tried a turn later for this high efficiency play of trying to get in 4 points damage per card on a 3-card level like you see here. And this is kind of what you're doing. You're buying time with these style turns until you draw into one of those Blood Rush Bellows and can push that 4 damage per card at a 4 to 5 card level. And that's usually how you win these games. You'll most boringly block out with a lot of your hands, and until you see these power combinations you're seeing here, that's really the only time you ever attack. I'm very big on trying to keep a good life lead in this matchup, because you will be able to push through damage late with high Intimidate counts, and it's something they can't really deal with very well, especially the more aggressive these lists get. And they're not really worried about fatiguing, because the thing is, they're going to leak so much damage trading damage with you early on that by the time you get down to like your last 10 cards, you're probably going to have like 6 barraging beatdowns left in your deck, and you're going to have a pretty decent life lead. So most of the time you can just take the 10 damage they're throwing back at you, just so you can come back for 10 damage of your own that they literally can't block to close out a game. Against Fi, the deck brings in Brandish, That All You Got, and then Romping Club, and we're taking out the 2 Savage Swings and then 3 Barraging Bighorns. And the reason for this is we don't need that many 6s, since it's very rare we'll ever actually play out a Blood Rush Bellow, and we don't need the 6 count to be that high. And we also don't need that many resources, since most turns we're just pitching 1 card. And the game plan here is very simple. Offensively, we want to average at least 4 points of damage per card, and Club will always allow us to do this with a 1-card hand. Swing Big, Barraging Beatdown, and Brandish allow us to do this with a 2-card hand. And when our Tunic reaches 3 counters, we're trying to have a 2-cost attack in our arsenal so that we can block down to, say, just a single blue in our hand. And then on these turns, we'll be rolling for Scabskin Leathers. And if we get the 1 action point, we'll just pitch and swing the club and then try again on the following turn. But if we happen to get that 2nd action point, we'll play out that pack hunt, swing big, or command and conquer, and also follow it up with a club swing off the tunic resource. And obviously the sequencing for this will change depending on the situation, but this allows us to threaten 10 or more damage off just 2 cards. And if you can get off one of these style turns in a game, you greatly increase your win percentage. And if you happen to get multiple of these off, you actually start to feel extremely favored in the matchup. And the reason for this is 5 just can't match this level of efficiency where you're starting to exceed 5 damage per card on a multiple turn basis. All right. Against Iyslander, we bring in Skullhorn and Northern Gloves. And for the deck, we actually bring in Erase Face and Oasis Respite and take out the Sink Blows and Fate for Scenes. The way I kind of simplify it in the too long didn't listen to version of this would be, if you don't feel comfortable playing against Wizard, just run Mandible Claws and just play out your Blood Rush Bellows and just make them have it. But if you feel more comfortable and understand a lot of the cards that Iyslander is running, I really do encourage you to run Romping Club and trying to go with a more slower game plan, but trying to open with that aggression and bait out blocks, because you can have a good opening and, you know, kind of draw into high intimidate turns and actually just run them over with Romping Club if they don't have ways to punish those early. So with that being said, for me personally, I like running Romping Club because it gives me 2 options, right? If I happen to draw into these really nutty high intimidate turns, I can just burn the Iyslander player out. And if I happen to not see those or don't see enough of them, I can try and navigate to this backup plan of just running them out of win conditions and winning that game through basically fatiguing them. For the remaining matchups, the deck list linked below will have a brief rundown of the configuration of the deck depending on the matchups and some brief notes about the matchup as well. I hope you enjoyed the video, and be sure to subscribe so that Murphy stops crying in the background.